Hello, my friend. How are you? It's good to see you again. This is Dan versus everything. So, let me give you a little bit of background before we jump into the subject. I've been going to church, and I've been going to an Orthodox church. I've gone 3 times, and each time I go, it becomes more obvious to me that in order to be a true member of this group, I will eventually need to affirm the Trinity, and rejecting the Trinity will not be a valid option in this particular congregation. And so, I've been mulling over the Trinity. I've been thinking about the Trinity. And as I expressed in my previous video, I've been contemplating the nature of that particular mystery and whether or not I could believe it. And I received a very thoughtful comment under that video describing an interpretation of the Trinity. And I was going to leave a nice, thoughtful response to it, but my response ended up being lost. And so I can't get back in there and write it again. I couldn't force myself to do it, but I did decide that I was going to do a video. Well, I also thought, hey, I might as well do some research on this subject now that I have the space and the time. And so I decided I was going to do some research and then come with some notes because this is obviously a subject that sort of transcends understanding and bridges into the unknowable and the unknown. And so I started going down this trail because in my response, which I was formulating regarding the Trinity, I was going to describe the Father and the nature of the Father. And as I was thinking about, the difference between the Father and Christ and the Holy Spirit and all these different things, and in the way that I was going to respond to that very thoughtful comment, it became clear to me, and I was thinking about this maybe in a different way for the first time. There really are not very many authentically patriarchal creation myths. It's a very small list. And then I also noticed something which I found somewhat peculiar, which is that there's no female deity figure in Christianity either at all, which is quite anomalous. So I did what any sane person would do in 2025. I recruited ChatGPT to help. And initially, some of its estimates I found to be less than compelling. But that's sort of the nature of the beast with ChatGPT. You have to work with it until it gets to a place that makes sense. And of course, this doesn't mean that it's true, but if you use the tool carefully, you can get something approximating a reasonable estimate of what things might be. And so that's how I used it. I used it to approximate an estimate. It took some back and forth, but eventually I asked it how many religions, would it consider there to have been, and it said, thousands of small ones, but it could say with confidence that there were 300 religions that it had awareness of. I thought that's fine. We don't need to go smaller than that. We don't need to, list off the 10,000 possible religions that have existed. We'll just stick with 300. And then I asked it, how many religions have no female deity figure whatsoever? There's no female deity at all in any part of them. How many of those? Gave me a list of somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6. That's 2%. That is 2%. Now, you could say that the Virgin Mother Mary counts. I think that would be a heresy. You could say it. But, really we have Judaism and Zoroastrianism and deism. The list is fairly short. And then, of course, we have, if you don't count Mother Mary, we have Islam and Christianity as well, making 5 or 6, depending on how you want to look at it. And there could be others, but the point is there's not many others. Even if there are others, there's not many. So we're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of less than 10%, probably more than 2% of religions. But it's probably closer to the side of 2. It's probably somewhere between 2 and 5% of religions have no female deity whatsoever. That's a very small amount. And then I asked it, what percentage of the myths that do have female deities have them in the form of a creation myth. It said somewhere in the neighborhood of 15%. I didn't dig quite as deep on this one. I didn't flesh it out back and forth. Also, I'm not as educated on it. So my cats are going crazy because there's a little black cat walking through my front yard. And this black cat happens to be their sibling. They may not know it, but he is their sibling. So you see, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 8 times as many religions that have a female creation myth than there are religions with no female deity whatsoever. Now, that's apples to oranges, but it's an interesting point because if 2% of religions have no female deity character whatsoever, that means 98% of them do. And there are religions which have no patriarchal character whatsoever. And the number of those is higher, although I didn't drill down. That's an easy exercise to do. I could do that at some point. And so it led me to begin to contemplate this in a different way, where I started to realize that the notion of a patriarchal creator is somewhat abstract. It's not an easy idea to get to. From the perspective of like the evolution of ideas and like the logical progression of ideas. That's not a super obvious conclusion to draw. The idea that the creator himself would be patriarchal and male, and that there doesn't even need to be a female in the creation myth. So I began to think about the anomaly of the patriarchal creation myth, how incredibly rare that is and has been in history, and how unlikely it is, even in some ways, for that to form. And it got me thinking, like a female creation myth, well, that's pretty obvious. That's pretty self explanatory from the human perspective. That's why they call it Mother Nature, right? The giver of life, all that. Well, a patriarchal creation myth, that's not the same. So then the question would be, so why? Why would somebody choose to found a religion on the father and to not include a mother in that creation myth? And what does that say about the value hierarchy of the particular religion which is choosing to have, or you could say evolving to have? The language choice isn't super important to me as I'm fleshing out this concept, because this is a brand new idea. I haven't spent that much time on it yet. Why? And if you can't answer why, then the question would be, what is produced by this idea? And so one thing that seems somewhat clear to me is that fathers are disciplinarian, they are more judgmental, they're a little bit more hands off, they're a little bit more, you know, grow up, figure it out yourself, do what's right, like in this kind of way. And so there's a certain kind of, on one hand, there's a certain kind of libertarian freedom that comes with the father, and on the other hand, there's a certain kind of structure and order. Um, and I do sort of think of the father that way, the Abrahamic religion, um, the father figure. who is known as God. Um, I do sort of think of him that way, as basically being the structure, the natural order, um, the truth, the perfection, the standard. Basically, the Father is the standard. And in the subject of the Trinity, the Son could be interpreted as the example, the jury, the judge, and the reason Christ makes a good judge is because he's lived it, and he's actually lived up to the standard of the Father, if you understand what I'm saying. So the Father is the standard, and the Son is the judge of us because the Son has lived up to the standard. This is an interpretation of the Trinity which makes sense to me, and that's the reason why in the end times Christ comes back with a flaming sword to judge. So while he's here on earth, he's a merciful guide, he's a shepherd, etc., all of these things. He's teaching, he's counseling, he's giving parables and guidance. In the end, if you fail to live up, you are judged. And this is really the way it is when you have any value, when there's any kind of propositional value, the value itself is a judge. As soon as you accept the value, then you are judged. And in fact, if the value is true, then you are judged whether you accept it or not. And this is the nature of the salvation and judgment which occurs in the New Testament. And this for me is one of the most compelling arguments behind the Trinity, at least from a archetypal perspective or from a narrative perspective. And I don't feel like getting super into the Holy Spirit right now because the Holy Spirit is kind of a mystery. But so this is what I would say is sort of my understanding of the relationship between the one of my most I would say, how would I phrase this? It is one of the ways to think about the Trinity that is the most agreeable to me. Because if I try to take the Trinity the way that the Orthodox Church tried to give it to me, that doesn't compel me. But when I think about it in these terms, which is a little bit more similar to like Jordan Peterson and the way he thinks about the things like this, for me now we're getting somewhere. This is a form of thinking and a form of language which I can sort of get behind. In order to think about this subject in this way, I don't have to violate my logical axioms. I don't have to violate the scientific understanding I have of the way that the world works. I can simply contemplate the power and the meaning and the metaphor and the example behind what the Trinity could mean. But I will confess that in everything that I've just said, I don't actually think that the Trinity is necessary to facilitate those things. But I do think that these are basically byproducts of a patriarchal divinity, of a patriarchal creation myth. The idea that in the end, it's the Father's standard that you have to live up to. And if the Father didn't choose to give you life, you wouldn't have it. So, just a bit of a ramble on this notion of the anomaly of the patriarchal creation myth. It was just occurring to me that I didn't know of very many examples in history which had exclusively patriarchal creation myths, and in fact, even religions which didn't really have female deity figures at all are very, very uncommon, and I don't know of a lot of them. So I was mulling this over, and I thought, that's an interesting idea for a video. I should probably shoot something when I get home on this subject. Feel free to leave some comments if you have thoughts on this. I'm interested in taking some time to flesh this idea out more. But in summary, I think that the patriarchal creation myth has produced the highest competency cultures that have ever existed. And part of the reason for this is because fathers just tend to produce competent children. If you look at, the rates of success and competency in children, the presence of a father in the home is one of the most important deterministic effects in terms of how the data plays out. Now, I don't mean deterministic in a strict sense because there are people who defy the odds, but if you wanted to control for any variable and you wanted your children to do well, you would make sure that they were raised with a father, or that if you are that father, that you're present in their life if you want them to do well. And the thing that's so interesting about that is that single father homes, there's no variance between them and nuclear families. The children have the same outcomes in education, the same low crime statistics, the same success in the workforce. So um, it really seems to be the presence of the father that is the most important in producing that outcome. And I think that's the reason why a patriarchal deity figure or patriarchal creation myth could lead to such successful cultures and societies, is because you have the same personality behind those nations, those people, those households. And you have the same kind of high expectation, you have the same standard, you have the same judgment, you have the bar is high, and you have to live up. And, it's not going to be done for you. So, um, all that being said, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, subscribe, comment. Please leave your comments. I read them all. I will do my best to respond to them either indirectly or creating a video which addresses your thoughts. And we'll go forward from there, and I'll keep you posted on my thoughts coming out of church next week. And at any rate, I hope you have a blessed day, a wonderful day, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you so much. This is Dan versus Everything. Have a good night. Good morning, probably. I'm probably uploading this at 7 a.m. So have a good day today. Bye bye.